This is a companion piece to my video titled How Pay Works, which is linked right up here for all you lovely doctors who are considering a locums per diem job. So in this video, I'm going to break down the main contract terms you need to understand before signing for a locums per diem job. We're going to go over W-2 versus 1099, malpractice insurance, cancellation policies, and more importantly, what you may be able to negotiate. And yes, I'm just gonna be upfront and tell y'all, this content is gonna be a bit dry. Contracts are not the most exciting thing, and my goal here is not to regurgitate to you what you can easily look up on ChatGPT. I just wanna break down the most important things to look out for each section in a way that feels like an actual human being is talking to you. And as always, I am not a lawyer. This is not professional legal advice. This is just me speaking from my experience, looking at multiple locums and PRN contracts as a doctor. So without further ado, let's get into the video. So your locums job can come as two different types of contracts, 1099 and W-2. And yes, I said W-2. I know, right? All this time you thought W-2 meant you're a full-time employee, but no, it can actually apply to a locums doctor as well, right? This blew my mind when I realized this. So the main thing to take away here is that this type of contract just dictates the relationship you have with the hospital or locums agency or whoever is hiring you. So to get into specifics, if you are a W-2 PRN or per diem physician, that means you're on the payroll. So your taxes are automatically withheld and you may be subject to the employee's organizational policies. So that might mean you're required to do admin time or attend weekly meetings, things like that. But because you are PRN, you most likely will not be receiving any benefits. So that means no health insurance, dental, or retirement matching. And the reason why I'm saying probably and not definitely is because these contracts vary so much. There is technically such thing as a W-2 PRN physician job out there that can offer you health benefits, but those are extremely rare. So what I'm describing to you is just the general pattern. If you have a 1099 per diem physician contract, that means you are a traditional independent contractor, aka freelancer, aka self-employed. And this for me was just a lot more straightforward and easy to understand. So when you get your income, it is your gross income. No taxes are withheld. And if you want more information, check out this video here, How Pay Works, where I go more into distinguishing a 1099 contract from your traditional W-2. However, for the purpose of this video, the biggest difference between a 1099 per diem physician and a W-2 per diem physician is usually flexibility. You have much more flexibility as a 1099 physician because you're not beholden to employee policies or required to attend these weekly or monthly meetings as a 1099 PRN physician. So now you know the contract structure. Next, let's move on to compensation. And the key here is that it should be extremely clear and specific how you're being compensated. And I know what you're thinking, like, no duh, this is what you do for any job. And you should, if you're not doing it, then you definitely need to. But the reason why I bring it up is because employers tend to be a little skimpy with details when it comes to these PRN contracts. And it's because you're not a full-time employee. So unfortunately, you don't get treated with that same TLC as you would otherwise. So do not hesitate to ask a million questions if something is not clear. So whether you're paid hourly, per encounter, per shift, the contract also needs to specify if there are different rates for different circumstances, such as working nights, overtime, weekends, holidays, extra shifts. And if you're a hospitalist, whether you're doing an admitting shift versus a regular hospitalist rounding shift. And overtime is particularly important if you're taking on a job that pays you according to shifts instead of per hour. And this is because it's just not built intuitively into the pay structure. And honestly, it was something I've struggled with, and why I left my last job is because it was absolutely not clear in my last contract. And one thing people often forget about is unpaid required work. So if you have to do all your onboarding, compliance modules, EMR training, we all know that can take hours and days of our time before we even see our first paycheck. So your contract should be clear whether or not that is paid. And I'll be honest, that stuff is usually not paid. I have yet to come across a contract that will pay me for all that stuff. The scope of work section should also be extremely clear. For example, if you're a hospitalist, are you doing your regular rounding shifts? Are you doing admitting shifts? Are you covering the ICU? Are you overseeing APPs? And more importantly, are you expected to run codes? If you're doing a PRN primary care position, then what types of patients are you seeing? Are you covering the inbox? Are you responding to critical values? And if you're doing telemedicine, then super important to figure out what types of patients you're seeing, because these are usually paid per encounter. So you want to know, are you seeing extremely complex patients? Is it just an urgent care type situation? Things like that. So the bottom line here is that the broader the language in your contract is, that's usually a red flag, because you want your scope of work and your compensation terms to be as specific as possible. And again, do not hesitate to ask your employer a million questions, because that is your right. Malpractice insurance is one of the most important components of any contract, period. Locums, PRN, or full-time. You can check out this video here to see why. So for this part, I'm just going to go over the major terms you need to know when understanding the type of malpractice insurance. So there's two types of malpractice policies. There's occurrence-based and claims-made. Occurrence-based policy, I think this one's a little bit better, and that's because any claim that was filed while the policy was active will be automatically covered under that policy. And this is important when you leave that job years later. However, a claims-made policy covers claims only while the policy itself is active. So that means if you leave that job, then you could still be sued over a claim that was made while you were actively working. And this is where tail coverage is very important. So tail coverage essentially covers you after you have left the job or after that policy has ended. And all of this can be super expensive if you're left to pay for it yourself, because these cases usually go for about hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. So this could potentially bankrupt you. So my opinion is, do not sign any contract that does not include malpractice in it. The bottom line for this video is, don't sign a contract unless you can answer these 4 questions pertaining to your malpractice insurance. Number 1, is malpractice provided? Number 2, what type of policy is it? Number 3, what are the coverage limits? And number 4, is tail coverage involved? Make sure you pay attention to your scheduling sections, because this is where your flexibility can either be protected or taken away, which is very important, because the main reason why all of us are trying to get into the locums PRN gigs is because we want more flexibility in our lives. For example, I just signed for a telemedicine 1099 contract. And looking at the contract, I thought I could just schedule whatever patients I want and whatever hours I wanted. However, there was a requirement to provide at least 15 hours per week, and that had to be spread over at least 4 days. So, not as flexible as you think, right? But still, not bad. And cancellation policies are also very important, because most people will block off their calendar, arrange childcare, decline other work, or even travel for an assignment. And if that facility cancels last minute, then you essentially lose all that income if there is no cancellation protection policy in your contract. So a fair contract should not only describe what happens if you cancel, it should also describe what happens if they cancel. Your termination clause is also very important, because this also will impact your flexibility. For example, if you need to provide a 90-day notice before you terminate a job, that's very different from a job that requires 30 days, or best case scenario, no notice. And this section is also important because it can also impact your malpractice coverage. For example, there are some sneaky contracts that will say tail coverage will only apply to you depending on how your termination proceeded. So a company may pay the tail coverage if they terminate you with cause. However, you might be left to pay the tail coverage if you decide to leave the job. So your restrictive covenants are usually the clauses that dictates whether or not you can work for other companies and pursue other PRN gigs while you're working with that contract. And sometimes these can also affect what you can do after the contract has even ended. And usually the good locums or PRN contracts will not include any restrictive language, because that defeats the whole purpose of why we're pursuing this, right? It's all for flexibility. So why would we do something that limits what we can and cannot do? Then that being said, if there is restrictive language here, then that is usually a red flag. Okay, another practical section is who pays the cost of starting the job and actually doing the job. The costs that we are so trained to look for is medical licensing and DEA, but we always forget about the fees for credentialing, background checks, all that good stuff, or even just traveling to your locums gig if you're doing a travels-based job. For example, I started onboarding for this job and I realized halfway through that the application for applying for hospital privileges was about $250, and there was nowhere in my contract that this stuff would be covered. Thankfully, my employer was really nice and he covered it for me. But again, this is just a lesson to all of y'all to not ignore the additional fees and make sure it's as clear as possible in your contract. And this is really important for us locums PRN physicians, because a job's pay can look really great on paper, but if you're saddled with paying thousands of dollars for your own medical licensing, travel, hotel, whatever, it can make that value drop very quickly. Another example is that I was recently bamboozled on getting reimbursed for additional medical licensing for this telemedicine gig that I took. Turns out they'll only reimburse for states in which they actually need additional physicians, not just any state. So don't assume, guys. Ask your millions of questions, okay? It is your right. Okay, and now for the juicy section. What can you negotiate in a contract? And the honest truth, anything is on the table. There are some things like malpractice insurance that is standardized for all employees, but overall, contracts in general are designed to be negotiated. And I think too frequently, doctors will under-negotiate because we don't want to rock the boat. And let's be honest, I think most of us are used to signing away our lives to horrible schedules. We did this during residency, constantly kissing butt in medical school, college. So when it comes time for us to finally be free attendings and negotiate a life that works for us, too many of us will shy away. So I'm gonna tell you right now, you gotta stop doing that, okay? This is our right, and we deserve to live a functional and healthy life. So common areas to negotiate are, of course, the rate, holiday pay, night pay, cancellation protection, paid orientation, malpractice tail coverage, licensing reimbursement, travel reimbursement, patient volume expectations, start date, termination notice, most importantly, your restrictive covenants. My overall advice here is, we could just go toe to toe with every line on the contract and waste months, but just focus on the things that will actually affect your life and improve your life. So I kind of went over the red flags for each section as I spoke about them, but I just want to summarize the biggest ones. So number one, there is no malpractice insurance. Just goodbye. No, not today, not worth it. Number two, any kind of vagueness in detail. Again, it is your right to ask 101 questions, okay? Don't feel bad. It is their job. Number three, any kind of quick turnarounds for signing the contract. For example, within 48 hours. I mean, that's not enough time if you wanted to get your lawyer to look over a contract, which again is your right before you sign a legally binding contract. And finally, number four, if there is any sign your employer is being annoyed by all of your questions. For example, with this 1099 gig I just signed, my employer was kind of giving me the silent treatment with all the follow-up questions I had. Initially, I was worried, I thought I was annoying, but later I put my foot down, I realized my time is valuable, and ultimately I am gonna be okay without that job. And honestly, that should be your approach to any job. We are living in a country that has a huge demand for doctors, so you do have the upper hand in negotiating terms that will benefit your lifestyle. Okay, so that is all I have for y'all today. I mean, I know in this world of AI, you can just run any contract through ChatGPT and ChatGPT can spit out all the red flags to you. But I really hope this video just gave y'all a human touch from an actual human being who has looked over these contracts and signed some contracts that were not so great. But anyway, as always, if there are any more questions, there's a million things I haven't covered, feel free to drop it down below in the comment box. Otherwise, I hope y'all liked this video. If you did, please hit the like and subscribe button. I put out new videos every week, and I hope y'all have a peaceful rest of your day. Bye.